Right, we now come to the Cabinet oral statement. I call the Right Honourable Oliver Dowden.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on claims relating to an ongoing counter-terrorism police investigation that were reported in the Sunday Times yesterday, Sunday the 10th of September. The story alleged that 2 individuals, including a parliamentary researcher, have been arrested on charges of conducting espionage on behalf of China. Mr. Speaker, these are serious allegations, and it is right that they are being thoroughly investigated by the police and relevant agencies. We must not hamper their work or prejudice any future legal processes by what we say today, as I believe, Mr. Speaker, you said at the beginning of today's proceedings. As you would expect me to say, Mr. Speaker, it would therefore be inappropriate for me to comment on any specific aspect of this active investigation itself. I would, however, point the House to what the Metropolitan Police has said in its own statement, namely that the investigation is being carried out by officers from the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command, which has responsibility for investigations relating to allegations of Official Secrets Act and espionage-related offences. Of course, any decision as to whether to proceed with a prosecution under the Official Secrets Act and related legislation would be a matter for the Crown Prosecution Service. Mr. Speaker, it remains an absolute priority for the government to take all necessary steps to protect the United Kingdom from any foreign state activity which seeks to undermine our national security, prosperity, and democratic values. The government has been clear that China represents a systemic challenge to the United Kingdom and to our values. This has been evidenced in China's continued disregard for universal human rights and international commitments in Xinjiang, their erasure of dissenting voices and stifling of opposition under their new national security law in Hong Kong, and disturbing reports of Chinese coercion and intimidation in the South China Sea. Mr. Speaker, we are clear-eyed about that challenge, and we must be able to look the Chinese in the eye and call out unacceptable behaviour directly, just as our Prime Minister was able to do with Premier Li at the G20 in New Delhi this weekend, an approach that has also been taken consistently by our Five Eyes allies. But, Mr. Speaker, actions speak louder than words, and that's why I took the decision to instruct departments to cease deployment of all surveillance equipment subject to China's national intelligence law from sensitive government sites in November last year. It's one of the reasons why I banned TikTok from government devices. It's why the government has investigated and called out so-called Chinese overseas police service stations, and, as my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, set out in a statement to this House in June, have instructed the Chinese embassy to close them. It's why we have significantly reduced Chinese involvement in the UK's civil nuclear sector, including taking ownership of China's stake in the Sizewell C nuclear power project. And it's why, as Digital Secretary, I took the decision to ban Huawei from our 5G networks. And, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, in the other place, the procurement bill is being debated, and that will include national security debarment provisions that will enable us to act where we see malign influence in our public procurement. In taking this approach, we are aligned with our Five Eyes allies and other G7 partners, indeed every single G7 partner. So, the United Kingdom will deploy again an aircraft carrier to the Indo-Pacific in 2025. We have announced AUKUS, a new security partnership that will promote free and open Indo-Pacific that is secure and stable. And we will work with Italy and Japan through the Global Combat Air Programme to adapt and respond to security threats of the future through an unprecedented international aerospace coalition. Mr. Speaker, These Houses of Parliament stand as a monument to the freedoms of expression and belief that underpin our values. But just as these institutions have provided the paradigm for so many modern democracies, there are still those who fear such freedoms and who seek to undermine them and to interfere in our society. We maintain constant vigilance in our efforts to understand and root out this interference, and we will always take action to address it, whatever its source. In 2022, the government established the Defending Democracy Task Force. This group works to coordinate across government to protect the integrity of our democracy from threats of foreign interference. The task force is engaging across government with Parliament, the UK's intelligence community, the devolved administrations, local authorities, the private sector and civil society on the full range of threats facing our democratic institutions. These threats do include foreign interference in the electoral process, disinformation, physical and cyber threats to democratic institutions and to those who represent them, foreign interference in public offices, political parties and our universities, and transnational repression in the United Kingdom. And earlier this year, the government also passed the National Security Act. This has overhauled legislation applicable to espionage, sabotage, and any persons acting for foreign powers against the safety and interests of the United Kingdom. The measures in the Act will enable our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to deter, detect, and disrupt the full range of modern-day threats, including from China. New offences in the Act will enable the disruption of illegitimate influence conducted for or on behalf of foreign states, whether designed to advance their interests or to harm the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom government will do whatever it takes to protect our national security and this nation's democratic institutions, which have stood for centuries as a beacon of liberty, from wherever that threat may come. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Right, I now call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and advance sight of it. Maintaining national security in the face of threats to our values and to our democracy is the first duty of any government, and it is one where Labour stands ready always to work on a cross-party basis to keep our country safe. And I want to pay tribute to all those in our intelligence and security services, police and across government and beyond who work to protect our national security on the anniversary of the awful attacks of 9/11. As we remember those lost, we are in no doubt of the seriousness of the work that they do. And we recognise too the seriousness of the allegations involving espionage on behalf of China at the heart of our democracy. It is essential that the police, intelligence agencies and justice system are able to do their jobs, and we must support them in doing so. But we do need to know more about what action the government is taking against attempts by other states to interfere in our democracy and undermine our security. MI5 issued an interference alert about the Chinese Communist Party attempting to influence Parliament 20 months ago. The Security Service and others have also raised wider concerns. The Minister referred to the Prime Minister raising strong concerns about unacceptable interference with China. Can I ask, did the Prime Minister do so at the time of these arrests, or has he only done so now since they have been made public? The government also set up the Defending Democracy Task Force to look at foreign interference, but what has it actually done? Is the Minister on it? Has it produced a report for the National Security Council, as was promised? Has it looked at vetting levels and delays? The government has opposed the Lord's amendment to the National Security Bill that was put forward to introduce stronger checks on donations to political parties to ensure no foreign influence, and opposed Labour's proposal to close the loophole on shell companies. Has the task force looked at those measures, and why aren't they acting in that area? And what's being done about national security prisoners? It does beg a belief that Daniel Khalif was charged with national security offences but was able to escape under a van. So can he confirm this individual had already evaded arrest for 3 weeks when the police first tried to apprehend him, and yet he ended up in a Category B prison? And reports that in 2019 another prisoner was able to escape from Wandsworth Prison, also by hiding underneath a van. So has the review been completed of all national security prisoners, both on remand and those convicted, to see what level of prison security is in place, and if not, why not? And I'd ask him about the wider issues around risks to our national security from other states. Rightly, the Minister's taken action on sensitive surveillance equipment, and I'm glad the Ministers have accepted Labour's proposals around procurement. The Minister in his statement rightly talks of the systemic challenge that China poses, including on human rights. But the statement says nothing about the work of the Investment Security Unit. What is it doing? Nor does it say anything about the comprehensive approach we need to risks to our critical national infrastructure, where the head of MI5 has given a series of warnings, and also where the ISC, the Intelligence Security Committee, has been extremely critical in its report in July, warning of the lack of proper strategy on China and short-termism. We need to engage with China on issues around climate change and global issues, but we need also to be very robust about defending our national security. It's why the Shadow Foreign Secretary has called for a full audit of China's relationship, and why we have supported the National Security Act, but we have also raised concerns about Iran pursuing kidnap and murder threats, about Russia pursuing cyber attacks, and recognising that after 9/11 and the appalling terror attacks on 7/7, the country came together. The then Labour government worked on major counter-terror strategy involving everyone across government, police, intelligence agencies, local government and the private sector to draw up the contest strategy, which has endured and has strong cross-party support. But the government has been warned now for years about rising state challenges. So where's the contest strategy for state threats? We would support the government in producing one. A Labour government would work cross-party to produce one. But where is it? We need that contest strategy on state risks, state challenges and state threats to protect our national security. National security is too important to ignore warnings. We need urgent action to defend our national security.
Secretary Dowden.
Well, may I begin by thanking the Shadow Home Secretary for the overall constructive approach with which she has approached this issue. It is important that we treat issues like this on a cross-party basis in defence of our democratic institutions, and of course it's very timely that this statement should be made on the anniversary of 9/11. I will endeavour to address the points that the Right Honourable Lady has raised. I'm happy to write to her on any points that I miss out inadvertently. First of all, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary regularly raise with their Chinese opposite numbers Chinese interference in democratic institutions. This is an ongoing approach that has been going on for some time. Secondly, in relation to the Democracy Task Force, which is led by my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, that reports into the National Security Committee, on which I sit, and we receive regular updates of the work that he is doing, working with departments across government, not least DLUC, which is responsible for large elements of electoral integrity, but also devolved administrations, local authorities and others. The purpose of the task force is to bring together all those different elements to pursue a whole of government and society approach when addressing those threats. In relation to the points raised by the Right Honourable Lady in respect of the Investment Security Unit, so the principal purpose of the Investment Security Unit is to provide advice to me as the quasi-judicial decision maker in respect of acquisitions that may invoke national security questions. I take advice from them as to whether the government should intervene or not. It has been the case that in the past year we have issued 15 directions in respect of acquisitions. That is to say, we're asking companies to take action, the hardest then blocking it or some other remedial action. Over half of those are in respect of Chinese companies. She's entirely right to raise the question of critical national infrastructure. There's something that I work very closely with the head of MI5 and others in respect of. It is the case that countries around the world are looking again at their critical national infrastructure, particularly in the relation to the threat of cybercrime. And remember, a lot of this cybercrime often has a blurred link with hostile states. It's something that I take very seriously. I chair regular meetings on it, and we are constantly upping the work that we do. I have to say, though, that is against a backdrop where the external threat continues to rise as well. The Right Honourable Lady raised the point about the ISC report. The government will be responding very shortly to that report. The draft is with ministers, it's about to be signed off, and I hope it will be with the House this week. And she rightly raises points about Iran, about Russia, particularly in relation to cyber, but across a whole range of issues. What I would say is, in terms of our overall approach, there's two things we've done. First of all, we have tried to give the agencies a public face to interface with businesses and private citizens through a whole-of-society approach. So, for example, GCHQ now works through the National Cyber Security Centre to advise businesses and individuals on cyber risks. Equally, we've just created the National Protective Security Agency, which essentially enables MI5 to interface with businesses and individuals on protective security. And those agencies working through the Cabinet Office, and particularly with the Home Office and Foreign Office, work across the range of issues that arise, particularly in relation to Iran and Russia. So whilst we take this investigation very seriously, and it clearly should be conducted independently, I do want to reassure the Right Honourable Lady and the House that the government is taking a whole-of-society approach across all these issues to strengthen our defences against rising threats.
Chair of the ISC, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without referring to any specific case, may I gently remind the government that its initial response to the ISC's substantial and wide-ranging report on the national security threat from China, published just 2 months ago, was to suggest that our findings might be out of date. Will the Deputy Prime Minister therefore confirm that the full government response, when it comes, and we gather it's coming very soon, will set out specific steps to address the threat of Chinese interference, particularly within our democratic system?
Secretary.
The short answer to the honourable gentleman is yes. I have reviewed the response, and I'm content that it does exactly that, and will be with him shortly.
SNP spokesperson Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is timely today to have a security update, and my thoughts and the thoughts of my colleagues are with all those impacted by 9/11 on this, the anniversary. I'm glad the Minister mentioned the issues in relation to sensitive government sites and cameras. It is the case, though, that members across the House had to ask questions for months around Hikvision before any action was taken by the government. Will the government commit to acting more quickly in future, and will the procurement bill, as he states, allow this to happen? I'm glad to hear about the ISC report response that will be coming. Will the government also be committing to implementing the recommendations of the ISC report on Russian interference in British politics? Hopefully that response can also come soon. In terms of specific questions on this, when did the Deputy Prime Minister himself learn of these allegations and of these arrests? Why did MPs only learn of this from the Times? And will the government institute, as soon as possible, a review into the decision-making process that led to MPs not being told about this, in order that critical updates like this are given to MPs in future and this decision-making process is never allowed to happen again?
Order, I'm going to be very careful, but this is a major security issue, and it would be wrong to expect to break all that in order to brief MPs. The MPs that were needed to be told were told, and worked very closely on this. So please be very careful. I think my earlier statement addressed some of the points, and if need be, we can readdress that if we pick out which you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the first overall point that the Right Honourable lady raised, we take an evidence-based approach to action. I think it's right that before ministers take action, we don't do so on a hunch or an intuition. We do so on the basis of detailed analysis provided to us by the agencies and by others, and that's precisely the approach that we took in relation to Hikvision and indeed other companies Chinese-based companies that are subject to China's national security laws. In respect of when I learnt, or when others learnt, as Mr. Speaker said on a number of points in respect of it, you wouldn't expect me to give the House a running commentary on intelligence briefings that I received, but you and say the House would expect me to be briefed on all relevant matters. I would make a broader point, though, just in conclusion, in relation to parliamentary security. It is the case that we do have the Parliamentary Security Directorate, and the Parliamentary Security Directorate works very closely, particularly with the agencies, to support members of Parliament, either in terms of general advice, or if members of Parliament have specific concerns, they can raise that with the Parliamentary Security Directorate. I think that's the correct approach that respects the division between Parliament and government and the independence of the House.
Elizabeth Truss.
Mr. Speaker, these are extremely worrying reports about the level of infiltration of Chinese-supported forces into our democracy. Does my right honourable friend agree that what we need to do is to recognise that China is the largest threat, both to the world and to the United Kingdom, for freedom and democracy? And does he not agree that the government should designate it as such?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, may I begin by paying tribute to my right honourable friend for all the work that she did in this space, particularly when she was Foreign Secretary. She is absolutely right that China represents a systemic challenge to our interests and values. And it is also the case, for example, in respect of our economic security. It is the number one state-based threat to our economic security. And what I would say to my right honourable friend is that the government is absolutely clear-eyed about the threats that this nation faces and robust in taking action. Indeed, that's why I personally took the decisions in respect of banning Huawei from our 5G networks, in respect of Chinese CCTV technology, and indeed in relation to TikTok. And we will continue to take whatever steps are necessary, based on appropriate advice, to provide that protection for our nation and our democratic institutions.
Kevan Jones.
Thank you, Speaker. A key part of democracy is the ability to scrutinise the executive. The chair of the Select Committee at ISC has already said that Number 10's response to our China report was to poo-poo it and say that it was out of date. I understand the response was due today and it's now been put off. He mentions the Defending Democracy Task Force. We've asked for an update on that and met with radio silence. The Prime Minister has on his desk our report on international partnership. He's had it on his desk for 10 months nearly now. He usually has 10 days in which to respond. When will we get that signed off? And can I just say to the Deputy Prime Minister, if he's talking about security and democracy and which he, in the terms he has, that's also got to include proper scrutiny, which this government has got a long list of examples of how it's trying to avoid it.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, proper scrutiny is provided by the Intelligence and Security Committee. I certainly take the reports produced by the Intelligence and Security Committee very seriously. I'm fully aware of the membership of the committee, just to reassure honourable members opposite. And it is precisely because we take the recommendations so seriously that the committee will receive a comprehensive response addressing all these points, including an update on the Defending Democracy Task Force.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend, it's of course appalling news that we have a potential cell operating in and around Westminster, an espionage cell, and I, as a sanctioned individual alongside many of my colleagues, are particularly perturbed about this particular news. But that notwithstanding, I don't suppose it should come as perhaps any surprise, as my honourable friend's committee, the Security Committee, warned that the government was ill-prepared for this and the security measures that were necessary were not available. I therefore ask my right honourable friend a very specific question. This is, when did the Foreign Secretary get told about this investigation? Was it before he went to Beijing? And if he went to Beijing with this knowledge, did he raise it with his counterpart in Beijing? Because it's very important to know whether we have actually already said it. It's no good, by the way, coming to the dispatch box with respect and telling us that we don't talk about this. The Prime Minister did, and the investigation is not complete yesterday. So I want to know what the Foreign Secretary did. And can I just say to my right honourable friend, very importantly, that the problem lies in the mess we've got into over what we define China as with respect to us. Are they a threat? Or are they not? If they are a threat, why do we not call them a threat and take the relative action that is necessary to deal with them on that basis and sanction some people?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend, who is a former Cabinet Minister and current Privy Councillor, knows full well that the government does not provide running commentary on updates and intelligence received by ministers. What I can assure my right honourable friend is that, first of all, it is the case that the Foreign Secretary regularly raises electoral interference and interference with our democratic institutions with his Chinese opposite number. It would not be the case, and it has not been the case generally, that specific cases, particularly those that are subject to an ongoing police investigation, would be raised. The point is the wider principle, and we have been robust and clear-eyed in addressing these points and raising them with Chinese opposite numbers. And in terms of the action that we have taken, I mean, I set out the steps that I took in respect of TikTok and indeed Huawei, where I pay tribute to my right honourable friend's support in that piece of legislation. I think we got it to a very good place, the Telecom Security Act. It's not just the Telecom Security Act, it's the National Security Act, it's National Security Investment Act, it's the deployment of the carrier fleet. All of those things have happened within the past a short number of years. They are evidence of the seriousness with which the government takes this threat.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister just said that he holds the Intelligence and Security Committee in very high regard. And I just wondered on that basis whether he's able to commit today to the recommendation that they made in their recent report on China, which was around updating the Advisory Council on Business Applications, their guidelines in relation to intelligence and security, particularly referencing China, and how we will ensure that they are enforced.
Well, as I said in answer to a previous question, the full response to the ISC will be coming shortly. I do think that an important point has been raised in respect of Aqaba, for which I have overall ministerial responsibility in the Cabinet Office, and it's something that I will take away and something that I will discuss with the chair of that committee, Sir Eric Pickles, formerly of this House.
Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and support the action the government is taking? Just on this issue of transparency and accountability, can I ask my right honourable friend whether the data regarding the volume of both prosecutions and convictions under existing legislation, but also the new National Security Act 2023, will that be collated and made available to the House so we can track the scale of hostile state action? And can I also ask if the government has decided on any necessary changes to the MOU with the ISC, as it's required to at least consider under Section 93 of the 23 Act?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, may I begin? I don't think I've had a chance from the dispatch box to pay a genuine heartfelt tribute to my immediate predecessor as Deputy Prime Minister. Having done the job for a few months, I have a particular appreciation of all the work that he did when he was in that post. In respect of the volume of prosecutions and convictions, we seek to be as transparent as we can be with the House. I'm sure it's something that we can take away and look at with a desire to do so. I can't give him that firm commitment from the dispatch box, but if it is possible to do so, I would very much seek to do so. And of course, we keep the MOU with the ISC under review. We don't have any current plans to change it, but we keep it under review.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet again, we are back here as we watch watch the horse disappearing over the horizon, shutting the stable door behind it. Every time we act to take on China, everything the Deputy Prime Minister boasts about is always taken reactively. So just for once, could we get ahead of the curve here and take action in relation to genomics? And as I and others have been urging the government to do for months now, designate it as part of our critical national infrastructure so that we're not back here again in a few months' time having to explain another failure.
Well, I would just gently say to the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, he did serve in government and in cabinet for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. So I think members of that party do need to bear some responsibility themselves for the decisions. I think that they would have some pride in the decisions that we took. But more recently, under this majority Conservative government, we have taken a huge range of steps, including passing the National Security Act, the National Security and Investment Act. He does raise a very legitimate point in relation to genomics and its relevance to critical national infrastructure. It's not currently designated as such, but in my role in the Cabinet Office, I keep the register of critical national infrastructure under review, and it's something that I am exploring.
Tim Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank you personally for the care and support which you've shown to those of us who have been sanctioned by China? We are in the front line of this threat, but I have to say, neither before or after these revelations have any of us been offered a briefing by the parliamentary security authorities or by the Foreign Office or Home Office. In fact, I found out more about this character involved from my son, who just happened to be at university with him, than anything I've been told formally. I don't want to mention the current incident, but I do want to note that it's now a year on from when MI5 took the unprecedented almost step of issuing a security service interference alert about a character working within Parliament, for which there were no consequences. It's about a year or so on from the revelations about the activities of the Chinese Consulate General in Manchester, who thought it was his job to attack demonstrators, for which there were no expulsions, no consequences. It's months on from the recent revelations about the activities of the Confucius Institutes, which the government pledged to abolish. There have been no consequences, no abolition. Again, nothing has happened. And just a couple of weeks on from when we were promised by the Foreign Secretary he would take up the case of the sanctioned MPs and of Jibby, lie with the Chinese Foreign Minister, and yet came away with nothing. There have been no consequences. Is not the problem, Mr. Speaker, that for all the tough talk, there are no consequences, and the Chinese know that there will be no consequences? So specifically, can I ask him, will China be in the enhanced tier of the foreign agents registration scheme?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, may I deal with the specific question first and then perhaps reflect on the wider points? We are currently reviewing which countries are within that enhanced tier, but I think there is a strong case to be made, but you would not expect me to make that announcement from the dispatch box until we've gone through the proper process in respect of it. What I would say in relation to my honourable friend's wider points about the Parliamentary Security Directorate, we stand ready as the government to provide any further support that MPs feel that they require, and if it is the case that the honourable gentleman feels that he requires further briefing, I'm very happy to help facilitate that with the House as well.
Very well.
Can I extend my genuine sympathy to the two Conservative colleagues who appear to have been targeted by a suspected Chinese spy who was employed in Parliament and paid for out of public funds. I do know what they're feeling. The House will be aware.
I'm not sure that's the case, and I think we need. I think that's quite a bit of speculation. What I would say is I'd stick to a general question and trying to go into details of what may have happened.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did say suspected. The House will be aware that the subject of the security alert last year, Christine Lee, was never arrested, has never been charged with spying or indeed any other offence, and indeed was said by the previous Home Secretary to have done nothing criminal. However, there is a court case pending. I understand that Ms Lee has taken out a civil suit against the government. Can the Deputy Prime Minister update the House when that case is likely to be heard and what the government hopes to learn from it?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say in response to that that question. So what I would just observe is that we have, in light of the Lee case and others, that's precisely why we've taken enhanced powers through the new National Security Act. And whilst I have to hold back from commenting on individual cases, I'm confident that we have a much more robust powers under that legislation that will enable us to act.
Teresa Phillips.
And the ISC in its China report highlighted the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party to influence, co-opt or coerce into silence potential critics of its regime in the UK. We did acknowledge that the government is waking up to this threat, is taking it more seriously, but I would highlight to the Minister that we need more urgency, and I particularly highlight, for years the ISC has been saying we need a foreign agents registration scheme. It's now on its way, but does he agree it would have been helpful if it had been in operation on the statute book at the time of the relevant events that we're considering today?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend raises some very important points, but I would just observe, and I think it goes to a lot of these questions, is that we do have a very different relationship with China to the one that we had just a few years ago. It is important that we are not naive about China, that we are clear-eyed about protecting our national security, that we are clear-eyed about the threats that it represents, and that we are robust in taking action. The Right Honourable Lady rightly highlights the foreign agents registration scheme. The secondary legislation under that will be coming before the House very shortly, which will enable us to take the relevant actions under that legislation.
Chris Bryant. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Actually, the people who've been really clear-sighted about China have mostly been on the backbenches in this House, on either side, including the honourable member over there, some who've been sanctioned, and I've been delighted to work with two successive chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee, to whom I pay enormous tribute for the outspoken way in which they have pushed us towards the government towards a more sensible policy on China. My anxiety is we still flip-flop all over the place. This year already, we've seen foreign secretaries several foreign secretaries apart from anything else, but foreign secretaries one moment wanting to suck up to China, the next minute wanting to have robust words with China. It simply doesn't work. Why, oh why, have we still not declared that China is a threat to UK national security? Why, oh why, have we still not even seen the redacted version of the China strategy, which apparently was developed by, according to the government, was developed by the FCDO, but hasn't even been shared with other government ministries?
Well, as the Honourable knows, I have great respect for him, but I simply do not accept this slightly over-the-top characterisation of the government's approach. We have been consistent. First of all, we must protect our national interests in relation to China. That is why we've passed the legislation that I outlined. That is why I banned Huawei from our 5G networks, banned Chinese technology from surveillance equipment and others. It is also important that we secondarily align with our allies around the world. I spend a lot of time, and I know the Foreign Secretary, the Security Minister and others work very closely with nations around the world, particularly the Five Eyes, but not confined to the Five Eyes, in making sure that we share our understanding of Chinese intent and understand and we take coordinated action to protect us, not least through the military. But it is also the case that we must engage with the Chinese, as we do with many, many other countries around the world with whom we do not share a number of their values. It is not a realistic position to take to say that we should entirely cut off from engagement with China. We should engage with China, but be absolutely clear about where we disagree with them and clear-eyed in protecting our national security, which is precisely the approach that we are taking.
Bob Seeley.
you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I think, like the honourable member from Chingford Woodford Green, I think we can't wait to be able to discuss the merits of this case, obviously, when we can, and I understand the situation now. I just want to raise a couple of issues with the Deputy Prime Minister. I don't understand why the government, which is moving and has done lots of new things and we're getting more coherence, keeps thinking that we either bury our head in the sand or we effectively sort of go soft on elements of the relationship with China. We can debate with China, we can engage with China all we like, but we can also do so in an increasingly robust way which answers the threat that they are presenting towards us. And specifically, the one thing that the government keeps avoiding is the argument about economic dependency and the growing economic dependency that all Western nations have on China, and which will mean that in case of war in the Pacific in 2 or 5 years' time, which is what President Xi is planning for, this is what he said, we're retaking Taiwan by 2027, we will not be in a position to do anything about it without collapsing the global economy. So effectively, in the next few years, our hands are being tied by economic dependency, and every time I raise this case, the government is not even willing to produce an annual statement on economic dependency. Can we please take this issue more seriously? Because this is at the heart of security. No freedom of action means we have no security.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. First of all, I have a great deal of respect for the honourable gentleman here, and I have discussed these issues on many occasions. I would actually say, I believe we're precisely taking that robust approach. And when it comes to economic dependency, that's precisely why we passed the National Security and Investment Act, which enables me, ultimately, as a minister, to take decisions to intervene where we feel that any state acquiring technology could undermine our resilience, our ability to protect ourselves, or indeed enhance the capability of other states. I've taken the decision to intervene on a number of occasions, and ultimately we have issued orders in respect of Chinese-related companies in over half of the orders that we have issued. In respect of the resilience of supply chains, that's precisely why the Prime Minister established the National Security Resilience Committee, building on work by my right honourable friend, the former Deputy Prime Minister, in relation to the resilience of supply chains. He's totally right to raise that issue. I can assure him that the government takes it very seriously and is acting.
Very Chairman.
Deputy Speaker, does the Deputy Prime Minister remind the House of just December 2016, when the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister David Cameron, was in the Plough pub in Cadston with President Xi? We were all urged to be very positive towards China. Indeed, when I could express worries about the takeover of a global company based in Huddersfield by China, I was told to go away and be quiet. I've also consistently asked for an audit about how much of our British government and interests, British industry and interests, are owned by the Chinese. A simple audit. We've never had a positive or any reaction to that suggestion. When will the government do that?
Prime Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right to highlight the fact that we have a changed approach to China. The fact is that the facts on China have changed. Its conduct in relation to Hong Kong and the national security law that it's passed, the increasing evidence of abuses in Xinjiang province, the increased aggression that we see in relation to the South China Sea. There's no room for any naivety about China. We have to be clear-eyed, and we are being clear-eyed. That is why we've passed a host of legislation, why now, to his points about what's owned by China, we have for the first time taken the power to intervene on transactions, whether it's in relation to China or other companies, in the interest of national security, and I haven't hesitated as a minister to do so.
Nikki Agee.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement to the House? Does he agree with me that this latest episode shows clearly that it is vital that we do all we can to protect our democracy and our democratic institutions? It is right that the government continues with the protect, align and engagement strategy, but that at the same time actions speak louder than words, and that the Chinese Communist state needs to hear very loudly that we will do all we can to protect our democracy.
Prime Minister.
I completely agree with the Honourable Lady's comments, and that's precisely what the Prime Minister did at the G20 summit with Premier Li this weekend just past. And that's precisely why we have introduced a wide range of legislation to address threats, including in relation to academia in respect of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, amongst many other pieces of legislation.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Integrated Review refresh was announced on the 13th of March this year, and at the time it was welcomed that funding would be doubled for building expertise in government on China. We've since learned that the doubling was from a base the previous year of 170 civil servants learning Mandarin, of whom just 20 were to attend language immersion. Given that the UK hosts over 150,000 Chinese students in the UK who are learning about English language and British culture, is that announcement of perhaps 300 training places for British government officials now sounding a little modest?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, the Integrated Review refresh was very clear about China being the #1 state-based threat to our economic security. He cites the foreign language training. That is just one element of action that we have taken to increase our capacity in relation to China. Clearly, you wouldn't expect me to comment on what the agencies are doing in respect of China, but I can assure him that within the Cabinet Office and within structures in the Cabinet Office, we are constantly increasing the amount of resource we put in, as I know the Foreign Office is as well.
Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have some sympathy with my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, for wanting to strike the right balance. And I very much welcome the fact that he recognises we've come a very long way from the ill-fated idea of a golden age with China, which was only 8 years ago, because much of what has happened was predictable and predicted, and we continue to predict what's going to happen, as he's heard this afternoon. Why is the government so squeamish about not just talking about threats from China, but by calling China a threat? What is the difference between a challenge and a threat?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for recognising the evolution and the strengthening of our approach in respect of China. I won't add to what I said previous to that. What I would say is that we continue to enhance our capability in relation to China. I've outlined a number of measures that we take, and we continue to keep all of these things under review. I want to reassure my honourable friend, and indeed other members on both sides of the House, we are absolutely clear about the threat that China represents, but at the same time it is right that we engage with China, and that is the approach that we are taking, alongside working very closely with our allies. I think that is a sensible and balanced approach to China, which in no way whatsoever underestimates the scale of the challenge in respect of China as set out in numerous documents.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Deputy Prime Minister, an attack on this place by any hostile government intent on interfering with our democracy and its structures, including its members, is a direct affront to British democracy itself. Given that several members of this place have been sanctioned by China, can he give the House assurances that steps are in place to support and protect members of this place from hostile government, and make clear that there are consequences, as the honourable member for East Worthing outlined?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I'm very happy to give that assurance. Of course, we respect the independence of this House, and we provide support indirectly to the House through the Parliamentary Security Directorate. But I can assure the Honourable Lady that we provide a considerable amount of resource to the House in respect of this threat.
Damien Green.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I sympathise with my right honourable friend that on the Chinese matter, he will be facing countervailing pressures, arguments on the economic side and other arguments on the security side. Today, in his statement, he made great play of the 6 very welcome measures the government has taken to toughen Britain's stance towards the Chinese government. Can he give the House any evidence that the Chinese government has actually altered its behaviour in any way at all in response to this tough response from the British government?
Prime Minister.
Well, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is, first of all, right honourable gentleman, forgive me, it is never the case that the United Kingdom government trades off economic security for national security. National security always comes first in the approach that we take. And actually, we have seen action in response to the measures we've taken. For example, National Security Investment Act, we have blocked Chinese acquisitions of companies in this country. So we are biting directly.
Twig.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister how many requests the government has received from the security services chiefs in the past 12 months for additional resources to combat the Chinese security threats, and if all those requests have been met in full?
Well, you wouldn't, the honourable wouldn't expect me to comment specifically on the agencies, but I can give them a general assurance that we have provided them with the necessary resources that they need to combat all the threats that this nation faces.
James Sunderland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you. This unsavoury episode serves as a reminder for all of us in this place of the threats that we face, not just from state interference, but also from a variety of malign actors. Can I please ask Deputy Prime Minister whether we are doing enough to think about our physical security, surveillance and counter-surveillance, malware and IT on our phones and other Trojan viruses, and also governance of MP security?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise all of these points. It is the case not just in respect of China, but also in respect of Russia, particularly in light of the Russia-Ukraine war, and indeed in respect of Iran and other hostile states, that the threat landscape is increasing, and the government has to continually increase its actions. What I would say is that by the creation of the National Cyber Security Centre, working with GCHQ, we're able to constantly increase our action in respect of cyber threats, malware and others that he highlighted, and in respect of physical security, we have a mirror in the National Protective Security Agency working with MI5. Those in turn also work with the Parliamentary Security Directorate, which deals directly with threats to members of Parliament and is supported by the agencies and others.
Mary Rimmer.
Yeah. The Chinese Communist Party has shown once again it will stop at nothing to get its way. And the Deputy Prime Minister has said today that you do realise that there are serious issues and it's a systemic challenge. But they will not come out with the statement of it being a serious threat and being treated such. It is infiltrating our academia, and a lot feel very uneasy right across these benches. Actions speak louder than words, but you need to back up words with actions, strong actions, and give us the impression that that government is not being dragged by the heels all the time. We're constantly having to raise things, and the feeling there is no confidence around that we are taking them absolutely as a serious threat, and that is what they are. And we're playing cricket while they've got the machetes out. Please, please take some urgent action.
Prime Minister.
Well, we have been totally clear-eyed about the threats represented by China, and we've been robust in the action that we have taken. Indeed, the Honourable Lady talks about higher education. We have passed legislation in respect of higher education, in respect of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. That, in turn, requires greater transparency about sources of funding for higher education institutions, including from states overseas and hostile states. We are taking exactly the kind of action that she requests.
Woman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I saw firsthand at what was then DCMS, the now Deputy Prime Minister, oversee an increasingly robust attitude to China in terms of economic security and in terms of telecom security in particular. And to some extent, I wonder if that is why we see this growth in unwelcome attention from China. I wonder if, however, he can reassure the House that we will continue to take that increasingly robust approach, particularly when it comes to emergent technologies such as AI and such as some of the other increasingly high-tech areas where Britain excels in the world and where we will continue to attract even more interest from unfriendly states.
Well, my honourable friend has a great deal of experience from his time as a minister, and we work together on these issues. Telecom security is precisely an example of that. First of all, we put national security before economic security, on a purely economic interest basis, we should not have removed Huawei's equipment from our networks. We put national security first, and I was very transparent with the House about that. We also took the powers through the Telecom Security Act, the legislation required to provide that protection of our national security. So it's yet more evidence of how the government is taking a more robust approach and is increasing the amount of activity it takes with every passing month and year.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement, and sensitive to the restrictions of both the questions and the answers. But the facts we know that are in the public domain is that 2 individuals have been arrested on suspicion of working for a hostile power. They were parliamentary pass holders. Their passes will have been sponsored by individuals probably in this chamber. They passed the vetting for having a security parliamentary pass. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that in due course an important question that will have to be answered, not today, is going to be, were they recruited by the hostile power before or after they became pass holders?
Be careful what detail we do go into, and I know you're well aware of that. Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, well, the honourable gentleman made a number of suppositions in his questions which are subject to an ongoing police investigation. When that investigation has concluded, indeed, if the Crown Prosecution Service decides to take any action under the Official Secret Act, there will be a time for this House to debate the lessons from that, and the Government will, of course, help to facilitate with you, Mr. Speaker, the time for that to happen.
Come back, Don.
In the statement, the Deputy Prime Minister very helpfully refers to, and I quote, the erasure of dissenting voices and the stifling of the opposition under their new national security law in Hong Kong. In whatever dialogue that now takes place with the Chinese, can I ask again that the cases of my 2 colleagues, trade union colleagues, Lee Chuk Yang and Karen Ng Man Yi, who were the leaders of the Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions, be raised again? They've been in detention since 2021 and are now facing lengthy prison sentences purely for standing up for democratic rights and trade union rights.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, ministers both raised the general principle of the China's national security law and its application to Hong Kong and suppression of liberties in Hong Kong in very robust terms with their Chinese opposite numbers, and will raise individual cases. And I'm happy to pass on to the Foreign Secretary, if he has not done so already, to make sure that individual cases are raised.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. These allegations are concerning, but sadly they're not the first of the type. We've heard about the sanctions against MPs, the activity at the Manchester consulate. I've been ticked off more than once by the consulate in my own constituency because I said things they didn't like, and I've been filmed by a drone speaking at a Chinese rally in the city. In July, the Intelligence and Security Committee said there was a lack of a clear strategy from the government. Does the Deputy Prime Minister accept that that might be responsible for these repeated attempts, and is it not time that the government had that clear strategy?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
First of all, the integrated review refresh was very clear about the approach that we take in respect of China. We're clear that it represents the #1 state-based threat to our economic security. It also represents a range of other threats and a systemic challenge to our interests and our values. Ministers have raised Chinese interference with democratic processes, and any interference with the conduct of members of Parliament is totally unacceptable, and we will not hesitate in raising it.